All right. Welcome everyone for this month's Columbus SUG session. We are fortunate to have Rob Habraken with us today. He is going to talk about migrating your Sitecore implementation to XM Cloud. Rob is quite known in the community, and he has been contributing to the community for quite some time. And this is a very informative session that I have the fortune to attend in the SUGCON, and I immediately liked it and thought that we can get a lot of information out of it. So with further ado, Rob, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Marie, and thanks for the nice words. It's my pleasure. Thanks for the invite and the opportunity to present for your Sitecore User Group. So indeed, we're going to talk about migrating your Sitecore implementation to XM Cloud. As you all might know, there are quite some differences. And I think every implementation within Sitecore is going to vary. So your path towards XM Cloud may vary as well, but I at least can give you some pointers on what I think that is the most elegant path towards the cloud. So for today, we're going to talk about a few topics, differences in the architecture and the approach on how to core platform versus XM Cloud. An overview of the compatibility of features within both versions of Sitecore. And then we'll move on to a typical migration roadmap. So how would you approach such a migration scenario? And lastly, I'm going to dive in one of the topics that maybe is one of the most involving ones in your custom Sitecore implementation, and that is the custom content resolvers that we have or have been using and how they are going to fit into the XM Cloud architecture. My name is Rob Habraken. I'm a technology director in Sitecore MVP. And I have over 15 years of experience in Sitecore development. For me, XM Cloud is a whole new exciting chapter, but I like it a lot and I want to share my enthusiasm with you. So first, let's have a look at the major differences in setup, architecture, and mindset. What makes XM Cloud different from Platform DXP? Well, in a way, it's comparing apples to apples, but there are some important differences. First of all, as you might know, the DXP suite was an experience platform with marketing automation included, and XM Cloud is going to be a subset of that. But it's more than just content management. So I've called it a powerhouse XM in this slide. It's going to give you more features than XM, and it lives somewhere between the previous XM and XP versions of Sitecore. And it's actually probably going to cover most of your regular needs with the most common implementations of Sitecore. It gives you Sitecore Pages, which is an improved editing experience over the experience editor. It's a SaaS product, so that's completely different, but it's not a typical SaaS product because you are able to deploy your own version on top of it. So it does have some vast flexibility. But although you can deploy to it, there's a major difference in how you approach it, as I perceive it personally. And that is that you don't build on top of it, but next to it. And what that means is something I'm going to show you in this session. It's a part of the Composable DXP of Sitecore, where obviously integration is very important because it is a composable architecture, and it comes with a lot of other products as well in the complete composable suite of Sitecore. And it also has some integrations already included in there. And maybe for a user group, a very important one, it's a whole new development experience. And I like that a lot. I think the development experience has improved, but also the way, and that's something that goes along with the statement that you don't build on top of it, but next to it, also the way you implement Sitecore is going to change. So not only working with Sitecore itself. First, well, it's not going to be a deep dive into the architecture, but for a basic understanding of the concepts in this talk, I think it's important to briefly look at what how Sitecore XM Cloud is served to you. As you immediately see, it's a way less complex topology than the XP product. So you have less roles. And you have two environments. You have the local development environment on your left and the XM Cloud environment on your right. And actually both are provided by Sitecore. XM Cloud is obviously provisioned by Sitecore. So it's an online portal where you can log in and where you can deploy to. And the local development is provided by Sitecore in the means of an example repository or some sort of boilerplate, if you would like to call it like that, where you can start working from, and a set of containers, Docker containers from the container registry that hand you the images that you need to start up the environment. The local development environment contains a content management instance, just the regular one, as you all know, but with a few features less, because it's only been used for a headless serving, a rendering host container, and also Solr and SQL Server, but you won't do much with those. They just run alongside your implementation. So you probably focus most on the CM and rendering containers, and a traffic for regulating the traffic within your container. So that's a local development environment. XM Cloud consists of the same XM Cloud type CM instance. And on top of that, you have the Edge. And Edge is actually, well, it's an API to query content on using GraphQL, but it also provides you provides a CDN for your Sitecore media library items, for example. It contains a rendering host, and the rendering host is used to serve the renderings, but not for the production website, of course. The rendering host in there is often also called the editing host. I will refer to that in my talk a few times by naming it the rendering host, because it's only used for pages and the experience editor for your, well, editing and previewing purposes. That's the only reason that's in there. But it's an important one to remember, because it means that you also have to push your renderings towards XM Cloud, and that's one of the reasons you need to deploy to it. And then you have your content editor, the ones we all know, and a master and a core database, and not a web database anymore. What that means is something I'm going to show you in the next slide. And you see that you also have a front end, but it lives outside XM Cloud, so it's something you have to self-provide. In this example, I use Next.js, which is used in most of the examples, and also kind of the default approach, at least for us, when we're implementing XM Cloud. So both are controlled by your local repository. As I said, there's no web database anymore, and that changes a few things. The first, most obvious one is the publishing. In the past, with Platform DXP, you used to publish, which means that it would actually copy content over from your master to your web database. And at request time, your content would get resolved from the web database, which was your default publishing target. Now with XM Cloud, you're going to publish to the edge directly, which is actually a snapshot of your content and of the state of your layout at that very moment. And that's obviously going to impact your caching behavior because your layout data is now stored on the CDN, on the edge. So let's compare the architectures, and then I specifically refer to the implementation architectures. So you've seen what the components are that you get with Sitecore. I'm not going to dive in the architecture of XM Cloud itself, but in how you work with that. And I should include a disclaimer here because I've called this a typical approach because it's the one I've seen most commonly around. But it's not the only way you can do things, and it might be completely different for you, but this is what I've seen most. We are using Sitecore for a lot of more complex websites. So also for e-commerce websites, for portals, and well, maybe even booking sites, for example. And if you have that, you also need integrations with third-party services that provide you with this data. And these external data providers will typically connected to your own Sitecore implementation. So you start with implementing Sitecore, installing it, and then you build up those data integrations and include the business logic in different projects within your solution. So your development domain will actually include the Sitecore implementation, and your business logic lives on top of that. The benefit of that obviously was that we can push the output, in this case I've used the React GSS app as an example, with maybe some REST data going back and forth between Sitecore and React. The benefit of this is that you can combine data. So if you, for example, have a booking engine for the availability of an hotel room, and you have the description of that hotel room living in Sitecore content managed with some images, maybe coming from a DEM, I don't know, but you have your editorial content and you have your dynamic content with the availability and the pricing. In this example, we would combine the data and send it as a unity towards the front end, which is going to be very practical for the front end because they don't have to be aware of where this data is coming from. The downside is that you are really creating strong dependencies with Sitecore, which is Sitecore implementation, which makes upgrading a little bit more difficult. And on top of that, we have the habit of customizing stuff to make it even work better, like with content resolvers and rendering pipelines all made up custom. So when you move towards XM Cloud, you want to change this. And same disclaimer, this architecture was already possible on the Platform DXP. We just didn't see it a lot and we didn't have to. But now we kind of have to create this separation of concern where your development domain really shifts the ownership towards your own implementation and your own application. Because as I've shown you, the edge is a snapshot of the content. So we wouldn't be able to include dynamic data in there. That means that we need to move all the integrations towards the head, towards the front end, along with the functionality. But this actually creates a better architecture. So your Next.js app, for example, is going to, based on resolving the URL, resolving the rendering item in the graph, is going to provide you with a layout. And you can query extra content, additional content for like facets or lists or anything you would like to do, you can query that against the edge. But your integrations that we've seen in the previous slide, you would want to create them using, for example, your own microservices. You can obviously combine those as well, but I would prefer creating separate microservices to enhance the separation of concern and a more composable architecture. And then you would retrieve and store data coming in from and going to these microservices from your front end. So you really need to shift the location of your integrations towards the front end. And this also goes for things like security. So the security model isn't any longer exposed from Sitecore. You don't have a content delivery role anymore in a web database. So you really want to manage those things in your front end. It's going to improve the performance of your application because this now allows for example, static site generation because the content coming from Sitecore isn't dynamic anymore. And it also allows for a better maintainable implementation of Sitecore. So what's compatible and what isn't? Due to the different architecture and XM being a subset of XP, in terms of functionality, not everything is going to be compatible or can be persisted from your current platform implementation. So let's have a look at what is supported and what is not, because this actually is going to be a good indication of your actual migration path. And it also plays an important role in assessing how compatible your current setup actually is when migrating to XM Cloud. I've divided this in two parts. First, the functionality, and then the more technical stuff. Functionality-wise, everything that is related to marketing, like XDB and XConnect, with your marketing applications being ranging from FXM to the marketing automation tool, the control panel, campaigns and stuff, all of that is now something you want to migrate to either personalize, Sitecore CDP, or a combination of those two, because they're not supported or included in XM Cloud. Though you do have personalization within XM Cloud. The XM Cloud, the default XM Cloud provisioning actually includes the ability to personalize, and it is the exact same functionality as the separate personalized product. It's just a subset. So it's the basic in-session personalization with some basic personalization rules, which is going probably to cover most of your needs if you don't have any advanced personalization. So that's actually very cool because you can start right away. One thing is that you should reapply those personalization rules because the way it works is going to be completely different from what you're used to when using XP. So you need to reconfigure it. The Email Experience Manager, EXM, is no longer an option to be used, but you can use Sitecore Send for that, or an equivalent product, of course. Sitecore Forms is not supported, though I've heard on SUGCON that they're working on this. So I expect, well, I'm absolutely not sure on the timeline, but I expect maybe later this year or within 1 year from now to see some things on that coming from Sitecore. But until then, you need to either use a third-party product or only use custom forms. And Sitecore Identity is replaced by Sitecore Unified Identity, which is a mechanism to unify the login between all of the composable products of Sitecore. But you can't use it as if you're used to doing that, and we actually did that. If you're used to using that also for managing the login or identity of your visitors, of your web visitors, then that's no longer possible because the well, obviously the content is going to be headless and static snapshots. So if you build something like identity, you have to move the Active Directory integration or what do you have? You need to move that to the front end and add your authorization properties to your content model, for example. So if you have different roles, then you could maybe include that in your content model and use Graph to query on a subset of content based on, for example, claims that you get from your IDP. If you look it up, Rob Earlham actually described this process for the MVP website because it also utilized the Sitecore permission and rights model for the login, and he also changed that out to a front-end controlled authorization. From a technical perspective, well, some things are quite obvious because XM Cloud is headless only. MVC is no longer supported, so SXA with MVC is also not supported, and also not the MVC renderings. That's all going to be JSS. The search components from SXA are not supported, but you can use Sitecore Search or a similar tool for that. And your custom search indexes are no longer possible to be used. Also, you can use Sitecore Search for that, or maybe you can leverage some GraphQL queries for that, because Solar coming with the default XM Cloud installation is only to be used for the CM role itself. I will show you how this works at the end of the presentation. Things like universal tracker, device detection, and IP geolocation are all, well, no longer applicable because you have a headless setup, but you can get that functionality when you include Sitecore CDP in your composable architecture. Sitecore Publishing Service and the Update Center are no longer needed because that's built in functionality in XM Cloud. And the Update Center is, I think, a very nice one to mention because... Sorry, do you have a question?
No, I unmuted him. I think there was some background.
Okay, no problem at all. I thought you might have a question. Okay, so what I think is very cool is that Sitecore will keep your instance up to date of XM Cloud, so it will automatically update or your solution, and that even goes for your local instance, since Sitecore provides your up-to-date with up-to-date container images coming from their container registry. You're going to notice that when you use XM Cloud local development environment based on the containers, you will see that every once in a while you'll notice that there's been some updates in the containers, and that's very cool because that's something you don't any longer have to take care of yourself. So to summarize, I've built this overview chart, basic personalization or analytics that's going to work within XM Cloud, but you have to recreate the rules. You can't reuse the previous rules. And for any advanced marketing automation stuff, redesign this based on personalized NCDP. Search functionality is something you want to replace by Sitecore Search, EXM by Sitecore Send, and MVC needs to be migrated to, if you're not already using that, JSS. And publishing, deploying, and updating is completely taken care of by XM Cloud, so that's very cool. So now that we know what elements are compatible and not, this is going to dictate your migration path. But if you utilize a lot of XP functionality, you actually need to carve that out first. The beauty is that from a composable point of view, that's perfectly possible on your current implementation before actually starting the migration itself. So how would you go about migrating, and when does it make sense to do what? And for that, I've sketched this roadmap of what I would say a typical migration project. And again, a disclaimer, every scenario is different, but this is going to give you an idea of the steps you need to take. The first one is an assessment. Determine what your gap is between the two and create a breakdown of all of your customizations, because that's going to play an important role on migrating. And then start planning. I will deep dive into all of those steps in the next few slides. You need to prepare yourself and your current platform. So you want to transform your current architecture, and you want to do that based on your current setup. Then, and I'll explain what the preparation phase in transforming the architecture means, by the way. Then you start reworking your front end, adapt to a new content distribution model, introduce a new front end framework if necessary, and make sure you're running headless and preferably using GraphQL. And if you've done that, because all of those steps are still possible running on your current platform, then you want to set up your new implementation on XM Cloud and carry out the actual migration. And obviously, you could also opt for a parallel route where you create some kind of a hybrid solution and introduce XM Cloud right away. Start building on top of that, maybe with a reverse proxy, switch between the two environments based on the URL, and start building up a new environment. That's also very much possible. But I'm now focusing on a migration where you want to keep the current solution, and your delta is not that big that you want to start all over again. And this is the route I think you should take. And if you look at the complexity and impact and maybe workload over time, I've drawn this imaginary graph that shows you that I think the most work is going to be in transforming your architecture so that it is possible to do the migration and then rework your front end. The migration itself isn't going to be all that hard because the content is still compatible, and a lot of things still work exactly the same as you used to, because, well, under the hood, it's just the same Sitecore technique that you're used to be using. So diving a little bit deeper into the migration roadmap steps. First, the assessment starts with taking inventory. You want to take inventory of all of your customizations, because not all of them are going to be, well, at least still possible, or maybe work exactly the same. So you need to be aware of what they are. And I'm talking CMS, content resolvers, render pipelines. For example, CMS could be custom fields. XM Cloud still would support a custom field, but in your content editor and your experience editor, this would work like, well, you're used to. But in Sitecore Pages, a custom field, if you also require a custom UI component, then that's not going to work, because Sitecore Pages is not managed by your solution, by your implementation. Well, partly it's fed by some rendering data coming from your implementation, but that's going to be different. So you need to be aware of those implementation customizations. And for content resolvers, I will show you in the next section what that means. Render pipelines obviously do not make any sense anymore, because it's completely headless, and you only communicate with the front end using Graph. Then you would have to know which integrations you have, and as I showed you, for example, the booking engine, an e-commerce platform, and how are they embedded. You would take inventory of your personalization rules so you can reapply them later on. And then start with the gap analysis. Which version are you on, and how much do you actually leverage the XP or non-XM functionality? And are you using JSS already? That is also playing a major role in how big the gap will be. And lastly, start to isolate and refactor components in preparation of your migration. And yeah, I think you need to plan such a migration part of those steps. And maybe you can do that in preparation in a few sprints leading up to the actual migration part or the actual front-end work. So what I mean by that is that you, as I've shown you, want to move out your business logic or any business logic towards microservices or maybe composable products. And this is something you want to do first because it does two things. It allows you to already start moving the integration touch points towards the front end. And it makes your current implementation on top of Sitecore smaller, simpler, easier to maintain, but also thus easier to upgrade to 10.3 and to XM Cloud. So this process of kind of carving out functionality is going to help you make things more manageable. One example would be that you introduce Sitecore Search, which drops in connecting with the front end, and you might be able to already remove any custom search indexes, maybe your custom Solar implementation, or even any infrastructure related to that. So you can fall back to the default Solar implementation of Sitecore that only supports the DCM. If you do this first, then it wouldn't be so much of a migration step, but it would create a more manageable solution to migrate eventually. And then you want to upgrade to 10.3 ideally. Well, if you're running on 10.2, I think that's going to be a small step, and it might not be necessary because things would still work, but then even though you're better off upgrading if you're on an earlier version that's going to take a little bit more time. Yeah, so that's the isolation and refactoring step. And this is going to take up some time if you have an advanced solution with a lot of integrations. And the next step is to go headless, if you're not already headless, and preferably GraphQL. As I said, you want to drop custom render pipelines and maybe, rethink or redesign your custom content resolvers. And I have a section about this challenge later on in the talk. And depending on your delta, you want to develop new renderings or rework them to a headless SDK using GraphQL or using the GraphQL version of the Sitecore Layouts service client. And that would either be JSS or ASP.NET because you have an option there. I'm used to only using JSS for this, but it would work equally well with ASP.NET. So if you're already headless, keeping your renderings would be perfectly possible. If that's either going to be an SDK implementation of your own Helix content structure, doesn't really matter. It should be possible to keep that. So that's cool. And then the last step is to set up a new solution based on the XM Cloud Foundation head, which is the kind of boilerplate you're going to start working from. And you need to update your NuGet feed of your custom projects built on Sitecore with the XM Cloud feed, and start configuring your custom, your implementation of XM Cloud build JSON, which is used to configure, which projects included in the build, because they need to be built on XM Cloud as well. Configure your item serialization and configure your rendering, or I should say maybe editing hosts, because your real rendering host is going to run outside of Sitecore, and maybe any XCT transforms you require. And then I would say start configuring your Sitecore content serialization. I've seen projects where we are coming from Unicorn and we want to switch to Sitecore content serialization. So we do have to redo their configuration modules, and which also allows us to more easily migrate the content towards XM Cloud, because I'm setting up this new environment. If my previous environment is also going to utilize this, I can just copy over the output and import it in XM Cloud. But another option would be leveraging the authoring API. If the gap is a little bit bigger and you don't want to go from your current content serialization implementation towards SCS on your current implementation, you can maybe use the authoring API. I didn't try that myself for a migration, but it would be an option. And then when everything is set up, but maybe you also want to do that a little bit later on when you're running your first version of the website, but you can already start reapplying the personalization rules based on a new design. And new design, not so much the visual design, but the design of the rules. And lastly, also very important, design and implement new CI/CD pipelines. For the pipelines, well, you can use the CLI commands coming with XM Cloud to deploy to XM Cloud, but you obviously also want to embed deploying your separate front end, for example, and obviously trigger the content serialization. So it's getting, I think, easier, and onboarding is a blast with those containers, and you don't have to set up Sitecore anymore. You have way less configuration. It kind of works already out of the box, and you only have to wait, well, a few hours for the containers images to download. That's the only hurdle that's left. But also deployments are way easier. But as always, there's also a little bit of a challenge, and that is in this regard to get front-end and back-end developers to efficiently work together in a proper workflow. You kind of have to change your mindset when it comes to customizing and querying data. And I also want to look at that in this section, but first, let's have a look at how you develop. Your local development environment is going to be, well, you have two options. And the first one, which I already showed you with the containers, is called fully local. And in this method, you are going to run the Windows containers provided by Sitecore via Docker on your own machine. This means, because it's a Windows containers and your front-enders are probably running a Mac, that it's mostly targeted at backend developers. This is, I think, a blast to work with, because you have your containers running. You can hot reload your changes of your renderings into the containers, and you can use Sitecore content serialization to push content in. So you can use the content or the default targets, target configuration from Sitecore content serialization to kind of pull and push between your XM Cloud and your local environment. And it's very easy to synchronize your content with the container. And you can also deploy locally to your containers. So you have everything in place to locally to work on your Sitecore projects, except Sitecore pages. That's something you, well, not by default. That's not available by default on your local environment. So you have to work with the content editor and the experience editor when you're running in. There's some ways around it, but that may be a little bit of a different topic to dive in. And there's the second option, and that's what we call edge mode. Edge mode is, well, actually, you're not going to run the containers locally, and you are running your head against Experience Edge in the cloud, the non-production version of it. So what you need is, well, you don't need developer Windows containers. So It works on a Mac, and this is ideal for front-enders. And you can immediately test stuff on on your local machine with the content coming from the edge. You do have a dependency on backend developers or colleagues that are going to configure your XM Cloud instance if you're a front-end developer and if you are not used to working with Sitecore. Again, your mileage may vary. Some front-end developers I know are also working with Sitecore, others don't. It really depends on your situation. And you can't test your work on Sitecore pages. You obviously can work with pages in XM Cloud, but that's not going to include your latest update of your renderings that you're developing locally without deploying them to XM Cloud. So your content and your foundation project needs to be deployed by backenders or by Sitecore developers to be able to get an updated XM Cloud instance. But this is this is going to run very properly if you're running on a Mac, and it's also, I think, a proper part of the workflow. But as I said, this would be some kind of a chain where you're working with, you create your template, your rendering item, and your content. I've named it a backend developer, but it could also be kind of a Sitecore developer, and your backend developer is more working on the microservices and the integrations, or maybe the Sitecore customizations of the foundation, and then commit your changes to Git with a pull request, get a pipeline to deploy your code. Obviously, you can also deploy directly from your machine with the CLI commands, but I'm not a big fan of that. I will also always centralize this in a pipeline. And then as a front ender, you can work on your Next.js renderings. Commit the changes, deploy again, both to the XM Cloud environment and to your own head, I think. And then testing your rendering either by the tester in your team or the customer or whoever is wanting to have a peek at your new updated renderings. So as I mentioned, one more topic that's going to change more drastically, and that's the custom content resolvers. You want to maybe change them to utilizing Graph and maybe drop the custom content resolvers. But there's an asterisk here because it may not be necessary to drop them. You may still be able to use them. So that's one of the first questions I've seen when I started working on XM Cloud, and there was even some confusion online. Can you still use custom content resolvers in XM Cloud? Well, the answer actually is yes. But as you've also seen, the publishing mechanism has changed. So that also means that the content is not resolved at request time, but it's resolved at publish time. And that means that cache invalidation will not impact the resolving, so it will not retrigger your custom content resolver. And also, it's not possible to retrieve dynamic data at all because it's statically published to the edge. And that means that some of your custom content resolvers are just not going to work or not going to function properly. But those that produce static content will still work. So you actually have two options when it comes to this. You can transfer your custom content resolver to XM Cloud, but only if they're static. And the other option is to restructure your content and use out-of-the-box content resolvers. And this one is preferred because, well, you'll end up with less functionality, with less code to maintain, and it's obviously more mean and lean. You have quite some content resolvers, both data source and I assume you all know them, data sources and context item resolvers with both their item children resolvers and a filter filter to sort and filter descendants of a data source. So, well, to give you an example, if you would have, for example, a footer with some social links in it, and you would maybe typically create a separate data source with your social links in a separate location, and then use a custom content resolver to retrieve the data from that location and include it in the data with your footer. But you can also opt for including those, and certainly when you're not going to reuse them in other places, just put your social links as a child item, or maybe a child of a child of the footer item. And by doing so, you can resort to the default content resolvers. So those are the two options that you have if you have static content resolvers. So why did we actually start using custom content resolvers? But well, first of all, initially, Sitecore itself advertised this in its documentation as a way to customize your data model. So it was actually kind of default implementation strategy. I've browsed to a number of projects of myself or my company, and I found a few ways or a few reasons to actually use custom content resolvers. Doing things like changing field names or simplifying the data model, all to make the front end integration easier. Maybe restructuring content, like combining items, or even changing the hierarchy of items. Doing things like reordering, sorting, filtering, but also quite heavily including dynamic data, and performing some additional operations triggered by retrieving content from a request going onward. So if you look at what's still possible and what's not, it's very clear that anything that should happen as a trigger on a request and is going to produce dynamic data, that's not possible. All the other things are still possible, but you might want to consider using GraphQL for this, or just restructuring your content to make your implementation code well shrink in size, actually. So to show you a few examples, and this is just all kind of a pseudocode, but I've grabbed the code from some projects to show you and give you an idea what's happening in those. This one is nice. This is actually, this is when visiting a category page in a specific solution. Well, we use dynamic wildcard pages, so it were actually virtual pages, and we wanted to count the number of visits. And we actually used the custom content resolver to trigger this and update the facet. Well, obviously that's dynamic and that's not going to work anymore. You want to split off this functionality in a separate microservice and call it from the front end. On top of that, this is quite heavy XConnect oriented code, so we need to rewrite this anyways. Another example is where I've seen that we've used to decorate data based on dynamic input, like in this case, a query string parameter with some ID, and it's going to change the text or the action maybe of a button. And this actually, I think it's a bad design. You should move this towards the head and implement this functionality over there. Even more so because you already have the data available in the front end and you want to avoid getting too complex of a solution in your back end.
Hey, Rob.
Yes.
Just a quick time check. We have 8 more minutes.
Yes, thanks. I'm going to be able to finish within that.
Yeah, we have some questions also.
Yeah, I understand. So this one is funny because it's coming from the Sitecore documentation itself as an example on how to implement custom content resolvers. And this is actually still going to work, but the outcome will change, because in this example, they use the datetime.now, which is not going to show you the time of the request or maybe the last cache storage, but it's going to show you the publish date. And I think it's a good one to show you what it does when changing the strategy of publishing. And the last one, I've left out a whole lot of code because it's not important for the example, but this building a breadcrumb. And this is still going to work because the breadcrumb is static data. So you can prepare this in your content resolver. But there's also another solution, and that's using GraphQL. And I think this would be way nicer because it's going to produce less code, it's easier to maintain, and you can remove the functionality from your Sitecore Foundation implementation and move it into the head. And you can quite easily retrieve, in this example, all the navigable pages because they have a layout. So you can check on that, and you can filter on specific data templates. So building a breadcrumb could also be possible using GraphQL. And there's more things you can do with GraphQL queries. You can filter for faceting, for example, on a specific category name, or you can search through fields and field values, finding specific words. For example, all the news items in my content with the word cloud in the title of the news item. And obviously there's some limitations within GraphQL because you can't do recursive queries, and you also can't build a decent crawler. So as it comes to implementing search, you might, if it's going to be a more advanced implementation, you want to move to Sitecore Search. But for the basic needs of querying content, GraphQL is going to be a better solution than customizing your content resolver. So to conclude, the general approach of migrating to XM Cloud would be to first move out your customizations, isolate your own business logic on top of Sitecore or within the Sitecore implementation project to microservices, and then transfer the integrations to the front end. And this would prepare you for actually moving your solution to XM Cloud, and then revision your content structure and your content resolving, and if possible, reuse the JSF renderings and migrate your content. And as I said before, if the delta is too big, you can also do a more gradual transition where you build up a hybrid solution, a parallel implementation, where you start to gradually move over stuff to a new XM Cloud instance. But this is fairly well possible in a lot of cases. And the closer you kept your implementation to the default Sitecore architecture, the easier it's going to be. So why should you invest in moving to XM Cloud? Well, it's going to give you a better overall architecture with a higher level of separation. And it's also going to make future integrations easier. And I think the best thing is that it's going to create a shift in your development domain. So you get to be owner of everything you're going to deploy yourself and maintain yourself. And Sitecore XM is going to be one of the providers of your data, of your content. And the most important one is you have less maintenance and no upgrades anymore. And that's also great for your added business value. Thanks for your attention. And sorry if I took a little bit more time than I expected to be taking. But if you have any questions, please let me know and we'll go over them.
Yeah, so thanks, Rob. We have some questions in the chat. I will start from there. Okay.
Mm-hmm.
So first question is, does local environment have any WebDB?
No, you shouldn't be using that. There are some references left to the web database in some places. It is a port, and this is gradually improving. I've seen things taken out over the course of the last few months, but no, there's also locally no web database.
All right. Can Sitecore Unified Identity be used for SSO? My awareness is SSO for any identity provider is not yet available for XM Cloud, and Sitecore is working on it to be released.
Yes, my biggest point was that Sitecore Identity is going to be replaced by Sitecore Unified Identity. And for multiple products, Sitecore is still in the process of migrating that to the new model. But my main point being, you can't use it for site login itself anymore, or shouldn't do that. Yeah.
Okay. So question from Eduardo, any recommendation on which JS framework to go with? JSS, Angular, React, Next?
Yeah, personally, if I look at all of the examples online, it's and on our projects that we have been starting and will be starting on XM Cloud, it's all going to be Next.js. JS, sorry. So, well, my recommendation would actually be Next.js, because that's the most native to all the examples you are going to see online. And it's also embedded in the boilerplate, so you can start working with that right away. And it's been tested and works, but you have the freedom to use any framework you like better.
Okay. What should be content migration strategy from XP to XM Cloud? This is from Din Doyle.
Yeah. Well, your content model is going to be exactly the same. So if you don't change any layouts or placeholders, and you're going to keep your content, it's just a one-on-one copy to any other Sitecore implementation. It doesn't change when going to XM Cloud. Yeah, so I think the best way of doing it is configuring first in the preparation phase for the migration, configure Sitecore content serialization, and then just serialize your content to disk with that. And you can do that on your current implementation. And then when you have set up your XM Cloud instance, you can just perform a serialize, and your content will move in. Obviously, editorial content should maybe not be in your repository content serialization, so that needs to be packaged and migrated over, or you can use the authoring API.
Okay. Well, Ronald is not happy. Nice overview. So in short, it will just be extremely expensive. What is your take on that?
Well, that is going to hugely depend on how extensive you did customize Sitecore. If you went like all the way and customize all of the features and create your own modules and stuff, then it's going to be a more costly conversion. But if you if you have like the 10.3 running on XP, and you are already utilizing Next.js and Graph, I don't think it's going to be that expensive or that time consuming. And I have customers that see it as the last Sitecore upgrade. And as you all might know, Sitecore upgrades are, well, a lot of negativity around it that I'm not really sure I agree with, but they can also be costly. And then the same goes if you have a lot of custom stuff in there and a lot of dependencies, your upgrade is going to be from, let's say, 9 to 10 is also going to be more expensive. So yeah, well, depends. That really is the answer. Yeah.
I guess it's not only the question of like, the migration and to this platform is more of like, you are revamping your architecture and moving towards a better architecture and better performance.
Absolutely.
Long
Yeah,
term.
and creating a composable architecture is going to make your solution more future proof. So it also has a lot of business value in there. You are able to integrate with other vendors. You are going to more quickly be able to adopt new technologies. And so I absolutely agree with you. It's more than just upgrading cycle.
Yep.
I would like to add a point here, Rob. Recently, we're working with one of our clients doing a proposal for XM Cloud migration from on-prem. Doing the cost value proportion for a longer term eventually pays you off. For example, if you're doing on-prem, you're doing every 2 years a migration or something like that. The cost involved from the client side, if you do those costs, plus if you're running on a SaaS platform with no upgrades, but you have an upfront cost of re-architecting your entire solution. But if you see down the lane, like in 5 years or something, the cost comparison is pretty close, or XM Cloud would be much more attractive to the client.
Absolutely. And I've seen customers with a smaller count of yearly user sessions, because that's one of the things that determines in which tier and which cost you're going to be. And I calculated some major savings on infrastructure and on maintenance. And if you spread out the migration steps, you're going to end up with saving costs instead of adding requiring more budget. Yeah, well, I have and the example I gave, introducing Sitecore Search, replacing Solar or any custom implementation, that's or maybe not Sitecore Search, but another equivalent solution on the market that we know a few around. That's going to, if you take that apart and don't see it as part of your migration, but just plan that up front, I think it could really be quite manageable. And the lowest tiers of Sitecore XM Cloud are quite competitive. And if you add up a regular DXP platform implementation with the Azure costs and the license and the maintenance, it's going to be more expensive.
Yeah, it definitely opens up more opportunities. Yeah. I have heard, like, companies going to Algolia search or other search.
That's also an option.
Yeah, so
and obviously, if you have a heavily customized Sitecore solution that you've built on for years, and it's completely it's containing a lot of integrations with third-party systems, and you have heavily utilized XConnect and stuff, then maybe XM Cloud is not your most logical path to move towards. And Sitecore is still supporting and improving their Platform DXP. So in some cases, it might pan out to not be a good path. But yeah, I'm confident for the most the most solutions, it's actually quite achievable.
Yeah, thank you.
I think we've missed one question yet.
Yeah, I mean, I was going to ask that. So Eduardo asked, what about solutions that depend heavily on the integration point from the backend with MVC? I guess a lot of APIs will be needed to be created to consume these integration points. I think you described the architecture.
Yeah, I think that's true. Yeah, that's true. It's going to require a lot of changes. Yeah.
So Nadim, do you have a question? All right. Probably not. That was an excellent presentation, Rob. It's really informative, and we got to learn a lot from you today. Thank you so much.
Thanks. Thanks a lot for having me.
Yeah. And thanks, everyone. Thanks for joining.
Thank you.
Thanks, everyone.
Really informative. Thanks.
Hey, Madhuri.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. The video of this session will be shared on our SUG Columbus YouTube channel.
Yep.
Okay.
All right. We'll send the link. Thank you. Bye.
Thanks.